This is the story of a great city, a story of achievement, of triumph over setbacks that might well have ended in defeat. The proud story of Liverpool, with its famous names and memorable aspects of life during the past 50 years. These pictures, taken in 1907, recapture the yesterdays as they appear today. The sight of our parents and grandparents celebrating their heritage with a giant pageant staged in Wavertree Park. The principal landmark was its incorporation by King John in the year 1207. And this is the way they visualize King John granting the charter that brought that town into being. The pageant on that occasion represented a long and varied mixture of historic events, which, after all, is typical of the Liverpool story. The slow growth of the town through all those early decades, the struggle of the people against their feudal lords, and this scene you may have already identified, the surrender of the castle to Prince Rupert during the Civil War, was enacted in Wavertree Park 50 years ago, together with tableaus recalling more recent events like the dawn of the Industrial Revolution and the final emergence of modern Liverpool. And so, to its contribution to Britain's maritime power. For today, Liverpool is the greatest outlet for the nation's exports. In any one year, more than 30,000 vessels of over 42 million net registered tonnage sail in and out of the port. Throughout the world's trade routes, wherever there are cargoes to be carried, Liverpool ships are to be found. And 15 million tons of cargo are handled in these docks annually. A far cry from the year 1715, when Thomas Steers dammed the banks of a creek on the old Customs House site to create one of the first docks of the modern world. In 1926, the Mersey Dock and Harbour Board tender Galatea, in breaking that symbolic ribbon, commemorated a historic occasion, the completion of the Gladstone dock system, which was opened by King George V. The opening signalled the climax of the development of the port during the last century to the thriving thoroughfare it had become, stretching for 7 miles from the Dingle Oil Jetty down to the open sea. The transition from sail to steam brought a pressing need for bigger and deeper docks, which led to the completion of the Gladstone graving dock before the First World War, capable of taking the largest vessels afloat, like the beautiful Mauretania, the old pride of the Cunard fleet and holder of the Blue Ribbon of the Atlantic from 1907 to 1929. The Mersey has always seen people come and go. Among famous names have been Sir Auckland Geddes, Lady Asquith seeing her daughter and son-in-law safely aboard at the Prince's Landing Stage, which still remains one of the greatest floating structures in the world and a tribute to Victorian engineering skill. Here was Lord Baden-Powell, who had founded the Boy Scout movement at Birkenhead in 1908. Then there were these familiar faces, Jack Hulbert and Cicely Courtnidge, taking a new show to New York. But the scene has not always been as happy as this. Perhaps the most tragic return of our time was one from a ship registered here in Liverpool, yet which had never entered the Mersey, the Titanic. Built at Belfast, she had sailed on her historic maiden voyage from Southampton in April 1912, crewed for the most part by Liverpool men. Their families waited and hoped and prayed. But there were few survivors to recount the tragic tale of its collision with an iceberg. Today, it remains only a dim memory, although at the pierhead, rising above the river on which the Titanic never sailed, a memorial column stands. Fortunately, however, the cruelty of the sea has never deterred men from sailing in ships. And so the training of the boys who were to become the men of the Merchant Navy went on in the Indefatigable and the Conway. These proud old ships lay in the Sloyne, a part of Liverpool's tradition until 1939, when they slipped inconspicuously from the Mersey under the shadow of war. The Conway, however, was to finish her days as a charred hulk in the Menai Straits. Those training ships helped to foster old seafaring traditions, but throughout the years, Liverpool has been seeking new ideas, and this pioneering spirit was especially evident in 1893 with the introduction of the first overhead railway in the world. Today, the Liverpool Overhead Railway is world famous, although few people realize that this was the one that served as a prototype for those that were to come later. It ran the length of Liverpool docks from Dingle to Seaforth near many famous landmarks. The Cotton Exchange, the Town Hall, the Royal Liver Building, the echoes of its last train rumbled down the avenues of time in 1956. A sad day for the countless fathers and sons to whom it had been a natural Mecca with its grandstand views of the port at work. Today it still remains a nostalgic memory. August 1914, the call to arms. And with the advance of the Kaiser's armies across the face of Europe, the call for volunteers. And one of the battalions formed as the direct result of this call was made up from the nucleus of Liverpool manhood, the Dockers. Then came the Pals, with their brief but glorious history. On the green slopes at Knowsley, they drilled in their shirt sleeves and were issued with uniforms. It was Kitchener's grim poster, "Your country needs you," which reached the heart of every man. And it was Kitchener himself who came to Liverpool to inspect the Pals before their departure for France. From the steps of St. George's Hall, he watched the cream of Liverpool manhood march past. Sights like these were all too many in those unhappy years. Many of these men had said goodbye to their loved ones for the last time. But on the home front, there were other grim reminders of war, and even Liverpool Bay was not free of the U-boat menace. Meanwhile, the women of the city were keeping the home fires burning in every sense. Although they found time for comparatively pleasant work like looking after the children of the men serving abroad, they also made munitions, swept the streets, and generally did jobs that would have horrified them a few years before. There was money to be raised for the various war charities, and obviously it was just as difficult to say no to a girl then as it is now. Anyway, you can see they got their money. For even more adventurous women, there were the nursing and ambulance services. Florence Nightingale had lit the lamp that Edith Cavell was to carry with such inspiration, and now other women were anxious to carry on the tradition, manning ambulances reviewed here by the Lord Mayor before going into action. Liverpool had been pioneers before in nursing. In 1859, it had created the first district nurse, and it had also brought into being the first provincial nursing school and the first provincial children's hospital. As the fighting grew fiercer, the United States entered the war. The first contingent was led ashore by General Pershing in Liverpool from the old Baltic on June the 8th, 1917. All the time, the men overseas were rising to new heights of bravery. Men like the Liverpool docker, Private Redcliffe, who returned to his old school, a proud holder of the Victoria Cross for outstanding valour. Of the men who returned, many wore the scars of battle, and so, for that matter, did some of the ships. The popular twins, the Iris and the Daffodil, having hitherto led a placid existence as Mersey ferryboats, now limped home from the famous raid on Zeebrugge. So battered were they that only one officer returned with them, Lieutenant Stanfield. Only one surviving officer. But in all theatres of war, the losses had been heavy. At last it was over, and after the jubilation of Armistice Night, the people of Liverpool remembered their dead and built a cenotaph to their memory. The unveiling ceremony was performed by the late Earl of Derby before countless thousands who had gathered in the shadow of St. George's Hall. The war had taken its toll, leaving a legacy of much that needed immediate attention, the most urgent problem, the slums. With the Sanitary Amendment Act of 1864, Liverpool had been the first to face the problem of rehousing the people in a practical way. And now again, slums were swept away in the drive for new and better standards of living. Now began to emerge the Liverpool which, in the interwar years, set housing standards which were the envy of towns and cities throughout the world. Conditions in Liverpool, as elsewhere, were rapidly returning to normal, and besides the housing program, building of other kinds was going on. On this occasion, a foundation stone was laid by Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal, then Princess Mary. During her visit, she inspected the local Girl Guide movement. About the same time, the Lord Mayor attended a competition organised by the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, which, appropriately enough, had its beginnings in Liverpool, being formed in 1809 as the Liverpool Society for the Prevention of Wanton Cruelty to Animals. The city's care for its animals was illustrated every year in the May Day Parade, a show which has always brought the people out in their thousands. That was an annual event, but Liverpool has a proud record for new ideas. Here's one that surprisingly didn't catch on, the postal service on city tram. By now, the increasing volume of traffic was creating problems at every turn. In an attempt to ease the congestion and alleviate the unemployment position, work was started in 1925 on the Mersey tunnel. Far below, men were drilling and blasting the sandstone of the riverbed in an attempt to bring about the dream of almost a century. Lady Salvage, wife of Sir Archibald Salvage, first chairman of the Mersey Tunnel Joint Committee, opened a great new power station. At Edge Lane, the foundation stone of the world's largest tramway depot was laid. This was a building which was subsequently to change its role from the servicing of tramcars to the maintenance of buses as the corporation changed from one to the other. In 1927, the Liverpool City Council elected its first and only woman Lord Mayor, Miss Margaret Bevan, a social reformer whose name is still remembered with affection. One of the events of her year was to welcome King Amanullah of Afghanistan, who stayed here for a time and then finally left after seeing the Grand National. Let's hope he enjoyed his visit, for he lost his throne as soon as he got back home. The most memorable day, perhaps, in Miss Margaret Bevan's spell as Lord Mayor was the historic occasion when the Mersey Tunnel, the dream for so long, became the reality. On that day, a distinguished group of men descended the shaft, and Sir Archibald Salvage broke through a thin wall of rock far below the river to join hands with the Mayor of Birkenhead. A great day in Liverpool's history. Throughout the years of this century, the police of the city have earned a proud reputation. The immaculate precision of this parade held at the Review Field in Sefton Park pays tribute to a force that grew in responsibility and efficiency with the rapid growth of the city's boundaries. How many of us remember the sleeper coaches? Another idea that never really caught on. The luxurious coaches are really an attempt to attract passengers for the road transport undertakings that were for a time making quite a serious impact on the railway's monopoly for the carrying of goods and passengers. Ideas, serious and otherwise. And these were days, too, of new and changing records on land, sea and air. Although, to be honest, goodness knows what record was at stake when Dr. Bell and Mr. Lenny set off from Liverpool to cycle their way around the world. It might seem odd now, but it appeared to be a good idea at the time. Another pleasant memory was the unveiling in 1928 of a replica of the Peter Pan statue in Kensington Gardens, for which the children of Liverpool will always remember the kindness of the late George Audley. Meanwhile, the docks were being constantly improved in the drive to preserve Britain's place in world markets. And as ever, Lord Derby, popularly known as the King of Lancashire, was a prominent figure in these activities. These were the years of fierce competition when barriers were being erected against the old slogan of free trade. And if the docks were being improved, so were the roads which fed into them and veined the city. Long-distance haulage could not function over roads that had been built for horse transport. This was the opening of only a section of a new arterial road by a Lord Mayor who'd forced himself out of a sickbed to attend. Liverpool Cathedral, high on St. James's Mount, the scene here of a special service in 1929 at which were represented Boy Scouts from all over the world and attended by Lord Baden-Powell, had been rising slowly but surely throughout the whole of this century. The foundation stone had been laid by King Edward VII in the year 1904, and building continued uninterrupted throughout the First World War. The architect was a young man in his early 20s when his plans were chosen from a public competition. And as Sir Giles Gilbert Scott, he has witnessed his dream as it gradually approached fruition. Built of sandstone quarried at Woolton within the city boundary, the cathedral today stands testimony to men's faith and a tribute to British craftsmanship. On the 5th of June 1933, the hottest day of a very hot summer, the foundation stone of the new Roman Catholic Cathedral was laid and blessed by the Archbishop of Liverpool before a congregation of 40,000. The address was given by His Eminence Cardinal McCrory, Papal Legate. Work on this lovely cathedral was interrupted by the war, but has since recommenced on a modified plan. from places of spiritual guidance to a school for youngsters destined for a life at sea, the training ship Conway. And one of the highlights of this course was a visit by the Prince of Wales, now the Duke of Windsor. Liverpool, always conscious of the value of the export market and selling Britain to the world, takes a leaf from its own book in 1931 and sends its Lord Mayor on a goodwill visit to New York. He was entertained there by the Mayor of New York, Jimmy Walker. Other distinguished visitors this time to Liverpool were the Duke and Duchess of York, later to become King George VI and Queen Elizabeth. In 1932, they opened a £150,000 hospital for women. Only a few years before, they'd opened the York House Boys Club, part of the university settlement. The university had been granted its charter in 1903 and already had a fine record. Meanwhile, the city was keeping abreast of the trend towards flying and air travel, and Speke Airport was opened by Lord Londonderry, Secretary of State for Air. 30,000 people turned up to watch the ceremony, but it was estimated that there were even larger numbers on the roads leading to the airport. The Midland and Scottish Air Ferry Service connecting Liverpool with Glasgow, Belfast and London was opened by the Right Honourable J. Ramsay MacDonald. In 1933, Everton won the FA Cup, an historic occasion in more ways than one, because it was the first time players were numbered, and the last time they were numbered from 1 to 22. At Wembley, the Toffees, led by the great Dixie Dean, overwhelmed Manchester City by 3-0. Strangely enough, when Everton returned to Liverpool, they were driven to Goodison Park in the same four-in-hand and by the same coach driver who'd performed the task for the victorious team of 1906. A face soccer fans will never forget, perhaps the greatest centre-forward of our time, Dixie Dean. In the same year, Gordon Richards at Aintree broke Fred Archer's record of 246 winners, established in 1885. Sir Gordon, as he now is, went on to ride 259 winners, and at one time during the previous month, this great jockey rode 12 successive winners. The first and only time people have walked through the Mersey tunnel. A doubtful privilege because the tunnel's nearly 3 miles long, but on this memorable occasion, just before the opening ceremony, everyone jumped at the opportunity. And then, on the 18th of July 1934, the tunnel, through which today more than 10 million vehicles pass every year, was declared open by His Majesty King George V, accompanied by Queen Mary.
It is a deep pleasure to us to come here today to open for the use of men a thoroughfare so great and strange as this Mersey tunnel, now made ready by your labor. I am happy to declare the Mersey tunnel open. May those who use it ever keep grateful thought of the many who struggled for long months against mud and darkness to bring it into being.
And so at last, one of the greatest triumphs in the history of engineering came into being. The Grand National, which can always be depended on for thrills and drama, provided a particularly sensational finish in 1936, when, as the record books will show, Reynoldstown won for the second year. But great horse as he was, no one can deny that luck was on his side that day as he battled out a close finish with Davy Jones, ridden by the great amateur jockey Lord Mildmay, then the Honourable Tony Mildmay. "35 horses started, and for the most part the race followed its usual pattern, with the leaders gradually drawing away from the field, with Reynoldstown and Davy Jones prominent among them. Two jumps from home, and the crowd is stunned as Davy Jones runs off the course and Reynoldstown takes the last fence alone. Later it's discovered that Davy Jones's reins had broken. Unchallenged, Reynoldstown goes on to win by 12 lengths from Ego and Bachelor Prince, with Davy Jones a stout-hearted non-finisher. Looking back, just as exhilarating were the tremendous strides taken in the 1930s in housing. At this ceremony in 1935, Sir Kingsley Wood, then Minister of Housing, opened a new block of flats, one of many that were going up in the city and setting a lead at that time. It seems difficult to believe that these flats were built more than 20 years ago, and in fact at the time they were almost revolutionary in design and structure. But remember, it was not the first time they'd given a lead to others. In 1846, they had given the world the first medical officer of health, and 4 years before that, through Kitty Wilkinson, the first public baths and washhouses. "1939. After the years of rehabilitation, it was war again, and Liverpool became the gateway to the western approaches. And this time it was a grim struggle for survival, a struggle kept alive by Britain's mastery of the seas, but a mastery that was challenged to its limits by the ruthlessness of the Luftwaffe and the German U-boats. And from a cellar in the shadow of the town hall operated the nerve center of the convoy system, which played its part against tremendous odds with the dogged courage that has always been associated with the merchant marine. Often these cargo ships were like sitting ducks for fast German raiders and U-boats, but still on they came. No fewer than 1,285 convoys arrived in Liverpool during the war, the largest consisting of well over 60 ships. Yet, despite the day and night bombing of the port by the Luftwaffe, besides the natural technical problems of coping with so many ships, there was no serious delay in docking. At one time, there were as many as 60 ships outward and inward bound, lying at anchor at the bar. Another attack beaten off, a rare moment of respite. By the sacrifice of so many of these gallant men under the command of Admiral Sir Max Horton, the Battle of the Atlantic was won. For the first time in a great war, there was no front line, and the battle was waged on our own doorsteps. The Luftwaffe did its worst, with inhuman success. In the May Blitz alone, 3,966 people in the 4 Merseyside boroughs lost their lives, and 3,812 were seriously injured. 10,000 of their homes were completely destroyed, and 184,000 damaged. A catastrophe from which it would seem almost impossible to recover. But from the ruins rose a new and greater city. The Liverpool Post-War Development Committee had already been established, and with the end of the war came the handing over to the corporation of the vast bomb and shell filling plant at Kirby. The council eventually acquired the freehold of the entire property, to which they added the purchase of hundreds of other acres in that area. The result was the Kirby Industrial Estate, new work and new houses for over 40,000 people. Now, too, the council went to Parliament for private powers to encourage new industries to come to the city. For too long, Liverpool's whole economy had been bound up in the maritime trade, and new trades were needed as a cushion against any further relapse in world trade. And so Liverpool rose again, the old symbols revived and new ones born of the rubble. Despite their ordeal through the war years, the spirit of the Merseysiders had never been higher. And if there was one man whom every one of us can thank for the uplift he brought into our lives, it was the late Tommy Handley, born and bred in Liverpool, seen here on a visit to his mother there. Other famous Liverpool comedians are, for the benefit of people who've been out of the country for the past 50 years or so, Arthur Askey, Billy Bennett, almost a gentleman, remember? Seen here in a typical sketch. Lovable old Rob Wilton.
At all.
How do you mean?
I haven't the vaguest idea, Wilde.
Who hasn't?
You haven't.
What are you talking about?
I don't believe you'd know a male hippopotamus from a female hippopotamus.
I wouldn't know a what?
You wouldn't know a male hippopotamus from a female hippopotamus.
I wouldn't know a male hippopotamus. No, I don't think I would. I don't see that it matters except to another hippopotamus.
And, of course, Ted Ray, who, but for his more famous talents, might well have reached the public eye as a footballer with Liverpool. As a golfer, too, he's a very funny comedian. The pioneer spirit returned to the fore again, And in 1947, the Mersey Docks and Harbour Board gave a lead to the maritime nations of the world by opening the first port radar station at Seaforth.
Can you give me my position, please? What is my position, please? And what is the state of the channel, please? And what is the state of the channel, please? Did you get that? Over.
Hello, Salvor. Your position now is 045072. There is a vessel at grid reference 036069, half a mile away from you, half a mile away from you.
Steer southeast by east. Steer.
Thanks to port radar, fog is no longer the menace it was. If there's one sphere where radar would be a boon, it's football. For even some of our favourite players don't seem to know which way the goal is sometimes. But all things said and done, Merseyside isn't too badly represented with Everton and Liverpool. Who doesn't remember 1950, when the Toffees went out to Liverpool in the semi-final of the FA Cup at Manchester? That was quite a day, with 200,000 people trying to get into the city to see the Grand National, and more than 50,000 trying to get out for the semi-final. Most of us remember that game with Liverpool winning 2-0. But not many people today know that it was a city engineer of Liverpool, the late John A. Brodie, who introduced goal nets. Anyway, to get back, in 1950, Liverpool reached Wembley, where they met Arsenal. And so the final, from which Anfield supporters came away miserably wondering whether the Reds would ever win the cup. Luck was certainly against them that time, although undoubtedly Arsenal were a fine side. This was the Gunners' first goal, scored by Reg Lewis. Centre forward Albert Stubbins misses a good chance to equalise. In the second half, Liverpool swarm into the attack, and after some clever play by Billy Liddell, the Reds were thwarted by a brilliant save by the Arsenal goalkeeper, Swindon. The London team's second goal comes from a sudden breakaway. Mercer sends the ball upfield to Dennis Compton, who centres to Freddie Cox, through to Lewis, who bangs the ball into the net. Liverpool fight back, but a 2-goal deficit at Wembley takes a lot of making up. In the closing minutes, they did everything but get the ball in the net. Still, if it was any consolation, the Gunners' captain, Joe Mercer, is a Merseyside man. In the same year, Speke Airport saw air travel with a difference. The world's first regular helicopter passenger service, BEA's new route from Liverpool to Cardiff. With 3 passengers, baggage and some cargo, the service took 1 hour and 40 minutes. For the first time in 12 years, Mersey firms revive an annual event and see that nearly 1,000 handicapped children have a day out on the beach at Southport. This is a day when a child may laugh and forget for a time that he or she is different from other children. In the same year, 1951, the Empress of Scotland docked at Liverpool, bringing to an end a triumphant tour of Canada by Princess Elizabeth, as she was then, and the Duke of Edinburgh. From the town hall, the royal couple goes straight to the cathedral, where the princess is presented with a bouquet of the red roses of Lancaster. After the presentations, the princess gives formal permission for the bells to be rung for the first time. Another achievement of which the people of Liverpool can be proud is the Otter's Pool Promenade on the River Mersey, finally opened to the public in 1950. Over a period of more than 20 years, millions of tons of refuse was dumped, allowed to settle into a solid mass and then covered with soil. Today it gives pleasure to those who had hitherto been unable to enjoy a frontage on their own river. And so to another historic Grand National. For as we said before, although each race has had an intriguing story of its own to tell, some years have stood out in our memories for some reason, happy or tragic. The most recent example was in 1956, when the Queen Mother's horse, Devoured, collapsed within a few yards of the post, and with the race apparently well won. Nothing remarkable happened for the first part of the race. The usual excitement, of course, but when you remember that in 1901 Groudon won in a snowstorm, well, you can understand what we mean. But gradually, Devoured forged to the front, with chief rival ESB in close attendance. At the last jump, it was ESB and Devoured, but the Queen Mother's horse cleared it in better style and increased his lead as they entered the straight. Now it looks all over bar the shouting, and yet it wasn't to be. The winner, of course, was ESB. And all the time, the drive for new and better homes goes on. New estates and blocks of flats are raised to bear practical witness to the city's continued policy of clearing old and insanitary property. At Speke, for example, the township is virtually completed as one by one the school and other amenities take their place in the pattern of the finished housing estate. But practical and efficient though it has always been, pioneers in affairs of industry, housing and health, Liverpool has never been an impersonal city. The welfare of its people has always been a prime consideration, and much has been done for the old folk. 50 years, the face of Liverpool has changed much. What can men like these recall? Lord Street, for example, at the turn of the century. And as it is today. Who else can remember the junction of Rice Lane and Queen's Drive? And the same spot today. The original Philharmonic Hall, home of the Liverpool Philharmonic Society, the third oldest society of its kind in the world. And as it is today, home of the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Society. Then there was the Pier Head in the early years of the century. And the new Pier Head. Yes, the pattern of life has changed considerably in Liverpool in these momentous years. Its record is a proud one. Many of these achievements we have just seen. Others have been the setting up of the first Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, the first school for the blind, and the first school of tropical medicine. The people of our generation have a city of which they can rightly be proud, built on traditions that are an inspiration to our children. May the city rise with them to even greater heights.